The Girl in the Ice. Chapter 1. The Discovery. The air above Kiruna was a heavy blanket of graphite and iron ore. It was mid-January, the time of the Polarnatt, the eternal night. The sparse street lights illuminating the Swedish mining town looked more like lost stars than sources of warmth. Everything was clad in a thick, unforgiving layer of frozen snow. Even sound died here, smothered by the cold and the immense pressing emptiness. In the distance, like a glowing red wound on the horizon, shone the LKAB mine, the economic lifeblood, and at the same time, the existential threat of the city. Within 10 years, a part of Kiruna would have to relocate, a bizarre, necessary exodus caused by the hungry digging beneath their feet. Chief Inspector Elias Forsberg gripped his glove tighter around the steering wheel of the unmarked Volvo V90. He'd been in Kiruna for only 6 months, transferred from Stockholm after a failed case, a temporary move, as the chief in the capital had sworn. But here, in the Arctic freeze, every minute felt permanent. He missed the chaos and the heat of the city. Here, only silence reigned. Beside him sat Björn Larsson, a young, robust police officer whose face seemed to be carved from the granite rocks of Lapland. Björn was a man of the cold, a son of the mine. Torneträsk, Björn muttered, his breath forming a white cloud against the window. One of the deepest lakes in Europe. This ice is already 1.5 meters thick. You could drive a tank over it. Elias said nothing. He focused on the dark frozen expanse ahead. The Torneträsk Lake. They stopped at a makeshift parking lot where 2 light cars and a modest snowmobile sat. A little further on the immense white plain, 2 silhouettes were waiting. 2 ice fishermen, their faces hidden behind hats and scarves, standing with the posture of men who knew they had found something that would haunt them forever. The fishermen, brothers Carl and Stellan, were pale. "We were trying the new spot, Elias," Stellan began, his voice hoarse. "My drill. It felt like I hit something. Not rock. It was soft and resilient. I first thought it was a big fish, a pike maybe." Carl took over, his gaze fixed on the hole. "Then I took the hook to feel it. It felt different. I drilled a second smaller hole next to it and shone my flashlight down." Björn's hand went to the holster of his pistol. The tension was palpable. Elias walked to the ice hole, now marked with fluorescent tape. It was an innocent circular opening, no more than 20 centimeters across. "What did you see, Carl?" Elias asked. Her face, Inspector. She was looking straight up, perfectly preserved, as if she was sleeping. Elias took the powerful flashlight. He knelt, the cold penetrating his trousers, and shone it into the dark depth. The light cut through the ice and the darkness of the water. And there she was, the girl under the ice. She was wedged at an angle, just centimeters beneath the thick ice layer. Her eyes were closed, her face undamaged, her skin a waxy, unnaturally white shade, a color only the Arctic cold could create. She was wearing a school uniform, a dark skirt and a grey blazer. "My God," whispered Björn, who had knelt beside him. "That's Astrid Nilsson." Elias took a deep breath, the air burning his lungs. It had been a year since 17-year-old Astrid went missing. The case had been closed as a runaway. The cold had claimed and preserved her. Elias stood up. His stoic demeanor returned. "Björn, you call the fire department and the dive team. Nobody, and I mean nobody, gets closer than this tape until the area is fully secured and documented. While Björn started the snowmobile, Elias focused on the gruesome find. He inspected the ice around the body with his lamp. No cracks, he murmured to himself. No blood trails on the surface. No sign of struggling. No abrasions. No fight. Someone must have lowered her body with incredible precision, or placed her in the water somehow, after the thick ice had already formed. It was impossible to fit such a heavy, frozen body through such a small hole. Elias knelt again, took out his phone, and zoomed in on Astrid's left wrist, which rested against the inside of the ice. He took a photo. On the pale skin, just below the sleeve of the blazer, he saw something. It wasn't a tattoo or a scar. It was a symbol, small and roughly carved, almost invisible. A moment of silent recognition flashed in Elias's eyes. He had seen this before, in an old file about the mine protest 20 years ago. It was the now forbidden and forgotten mark of the local Miners' Alliance. Astrid Nilsson hadn't run away. She had been murdered, and her perpetrator had left a message, frozen in the depths of Torneträsk. And that message pointed directly to the heart of Kiruna. The arrival of the forensic unit shattered the icy silence of the lake. It was a surreal scene. Men in bright orange jackets moved carefully across the white, vast plain, their equipment clanging sharp and strange in the stillness. They installed powerful lamps that cast a pale, ghostly light, making the contours of the victim even sharper. Elias immediately demanded that the ice not be simply broken open. The ice was the conservatory of the crime, the perfectly sealed capsule. "We need to cut out the area around the body," Elias instructed the fire chief. "Minimum disruption. This must be lifted as a block of ice, a monolith. We have no idea what we lose if we let the ice melt here." The diver, a thick-set man named Sven, carefully descended. His task was to guide the fire department's cutting lines from below. It took almost 2 hours. The sound of the chainsaw cutting through the thick ice was deafening and echoed across the lake. A sound that, in the quiet of the Polarnatt, sounded like a scream. Finally, the moment came. With ropes and hoisting tools, they lifted the massive translucent rectangle. A block of ice 2 meters long and 1.5 meters wide. The shape of Astrid's body was captured within it. She lay like a statue in glass, her young face peaceful in the cruel freeze. Elias walked up to the block. His gaze fell again on the carved mark on her wrist. He took one last close-up photo before the body was transported to the warm morgue area, where forensic examination would have to reveal exactly how long she had been dead and exactly how she had met her end. "A whole year, Björn," Elias said softly. "They thought she was out in the sun. She was lying here, beneath our feet." Björn shook his head, his eyes cloudy. "This doesn't happen here, Elias. We're a small community. This is an accident, a tragedy, not a murder." A runaway girl doesn't head out into the ice-cold winter in a school uniform, Elias retorted sharply. "And I've never seen a runaway mark herself with a symbol so closely linked to betrayal and secret wars in the mine. This is murder. And we have just stumbled into a very cold, very deep, and very old conflict." While the ice block was carefully secured for transport, Elias drove with Björn to the Nilsson family's house. The house sat on the edge of town, a typical wooden villa that looked small and vulnerable despite its size, beneath the gigantic piles of snow. The Nilssons weren't miner folk. Father Gunnar Nilsson was a successful estate agent, and Mother Ingrid worked as a librarian. A family that tolerated the mine as a necessary evil, but preferred to keep their distance. Ingrid Nilsson opened the door. Her face was ashen, but she wasn't crying. She was too stunned. "You found her, didn't you?" Her voice was a dry rasp. Elias nodded solemnly. "Mrs. Nilsson, I'm sorry. It is Astrid. She was found in the Torneträsk Lake." Ingrid slowly sank onto a chair in the hall. She drew her knees up, her back against the wall, her body a shrinking form of grief. "I knew it," she whispered, as tears finally streamed silently down her cheeks. "I told Gunnar all along she didn't just run away. My daughter wouldn't make her suffer. She was angry, but not cruel." At that moment, Gunnar Nilsson entered the room, an imposing, cold man. He wore a thick woolen sweater, and his posture was stiff with indignation. "What is going on here?" His voice was sharp and controlling. Elias explained the situation again. The horrific find, the frozen condition of the body. Gunnar looked at his wife, then back at Elias. "So she's dead. As I always thought, Inspector. She was a burden. She was too smart for her own good, too rebellious." Björn flinched at the cold reaction. "Mr. Nilsson, your daughter was murdered." The words hung in the air. Gunnar's eyes narrowed to slits. "Murdered? Nonsense. She ran away to hurt us, and she died from the cold. A tragic accident. You're seeing ghosts, Inspector Forsberg. Close the case. We want peace." Elias felt a surge of anger. He remained calm and professional. "Mr. Nilsson, the clothes she's wearing, her shoes. She was on her way to school. What was her last argument? What was she keeping secret? What exactly was Astrid doing when she disappeared?" Gunnar's gaze was now a wall of ice. She was researching the mine. She wanted to write an essay on the corruption and the toxic emissions. I forbade her to do it. She was always interfering with things that didn't concern her. "The mine," Elias repeated, the carved runes on Astrid's wrist coming to mind. Did she ever talk about the old strikes? About the earlier conflicts? Gunnar laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Inspector, that was 20 years ago. Nostalgia from old drunkards. Astrid was modern. This is about her foolish teenage rebellion. Now, if you'll excuse me, my wife needs support." He turned and walked away, without a glance at his weeping wife. Elias knew Gunnar Nilsson wasn't the murderer, but he also knew Gunnar wasn't telling the truth. The father closed the door, not only on the police, but on the memory of his daughter. The case had been closed when Astrid ran away. Now she was found, and for Elias, it was only just beginning. Chapter 2. The Cold Trails. The small investigation room at the Kiruna police station smelled of stale coffee and dampness. Elias had spread out the meagre evidence. The photo of the symbol on Astrid's wrist, the autopsy report still pending, and the few newspaper clippings the local media had dedicated to her disappearance at the time. Björn sat across from him, visibly uncomfortable. The atmosphere was charged with the unspoken fact that they had to solve a murder in a community that believed no murder could happen. "It's the Alliance's symbol, Elias. My father was in it. It's an old sign. Means nothing anymore," Björn said, his voice just a little too loud. Elias placed the photo of the symbol next to an old, faded image of the official Alliance badge. "Look closely, Björn. Your Alliance had a flag pointing to the right. This one on Astrid points to the left, and the crossbar is subtly different. It's a mirrored, modified variant. Elias pulled out a crumpled note with a handwritten remark. I checked with an expert in Norse runology in Uppsala. In this specific mirrored form, this rune means betrayal. Björn stiffened. Betrayal by whom? Maybe betrayal by her friends, teenage girls. Elias ignored the comment. Her laptop and phone were never found. She must have had them with her, unless the perpetrator took them. What do we know about her friends? Astrid's best and only good friend was Freya. They found Freya in the public library, where Astrid's mother worked. Freya was clearly scared, her hands trembling as she held a cup of hot chocolate. Elias conducted the conversation. Björn stayed at a distance, his role now more observational than active. Freya, the police thought Astrid ran away, but we now know she was murdered. We need to understand her last days. Freya's eyes filled with tears. Astrid was different. She was so smart. She was always arguing with her father about the mine. He wanted her to be quiet, but Astrid was searching for the truth. She believed the mine was deliberately dumping toxic waste and that the inspectors were being bribed to keep silent. This confirmed Gunnar's, Astrid's father, claim about her obsession with the mine, but added a crucial layer: corruption and betrayal. And her personal life? Elias asked gently. Did she have a boyfriend? Freya hesitated for a long time. She glanced at Björn, who quickly looked away and pretended to study a file. Yes, Freya finally whispered. A secret boyfriend. She never said his name, but she called him the Watcher. He was older, much older than us. She always met him outside the city, at an old abandoned barn near the disused railway line. What did she do with him? They talked about the mine. She said he had sensitive information. He was her source, her contact person. She was in love with him. She said they would expose the corruption in Kiruna together. Elias's next step was logical, a confrontation with those Astrid's investigation threatened. He left Björn at the station and drove to the mine headquarters, a modern, cold building that contrasted with the old city. His appointment was with Sven Olsson, the Director of Public Relations and Safety, a man with enormous power in Kiruna, whose approval could make or break the city. Olsson was a slick 50-something, with an expensive coat and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He received Elias in a luxurious office with a panoramic view of the mine and the city he controlled. Inspector Forsberg, the Nilsson girl's case, a tragic affair. Olsson began with an exaggerated tone of sympathy. She was murdered, Mr. Olsson, Elias said bluntly. She was obsessed with your safety protocols and your waste disposal. She believed your company was corrupt and that you were bribing officials. Olsson laughed, a short, controlled sound. Teenage fantasies, Inspector. We are constantly audited. Her father was an estate agent. He understood nothing about mining. Astrid was a troublesome teenager who wanted attention. And as for the so-called bribery, I've had 4 safety audits conducted in the past 5 years. Elias placed the photo of the rune sign on Olsson's shiny desk. Are you familiar with this symbol? It was left on the victim. Olsson's smile vanished. His face suddenly became hard. That is the mark of the old agitators, the Alliance. They wanted to shut down the mine 20 years ago. It's irrelevant. Are you familiar with the name Lars Larsson? father of my partner, Björn. He was a leader of that alliance. Olsen nodded. His eyes flashed with a suppressed emotion. Not fear, but pure, cold hatred. Lars Larsen, a fanatic. He hated me. He hated progress. He tried to destroy my career during those strikes. We are enemies. Elias felt a crucial shift. The focus had moved from the perpetrator to the motive. Olsen had an enemy, Lars Larsen, the father of his own partner. And Astrid had left the mark of betrayal that seemed to point to the old, hostile alliance. As Elias left the office, he turned and spoke one last sentence. "The autopsy will be available in a few hours, Mr. Olsen. Let's see then if Astrid's teenage fantasies contain the truth about your waste disposal, or if the only filth in Kiruna lies under the ice." Chapter 3. The Melting Truth. Elias returned to the Nilsson house under the guise of collecting personal belongings for the autopsy. Gunnar Nilsson was absent, likely busy maintaining his facade. Ingrid, the mother, sat quietly in the living room, her grief finally expressed in a strange, exhausting calm. "Astrid was a good girl, Inspector," Ingrid said softly, "but she was angry. She believed the world was full of lies. The only lies I wanted to spare her were those of her father." Elias asked if Astrid had hidden things. Ingrid pointed to a dusty shelf in the corner of Astrid's bedroom, where religious books sat that the teenager could not possibly have read. She didn't like the church. She said the only god Kiruna worshipped was money. But this Bible, she said it was her anchor. Elias picked up the heavy, leather-bound Bible. The book felt strangely light. When he opened it, he discovered the cavity in the pages. Inside were no notes about the mine, no essays on corruption. Instead, there were a few crumpled, hastily folded photographs. The photos were dated 1998, 20 years earlier. In the pictures stood two young men broadly smiling and arm in arm on a fishing boat on the Torneträsk Lake. They were toasting with bottles of beer. One man was Lars Larsen, Björn's father and leader of the Miners' Alliance. The other man was Sven Olsen, the current PR director of the mine, whom Lars Larsen had just branded as his arch-enemy. They were not enemies. They were best friends. Elias felt the cold shock of betrayal. The entire Cold War of Kiruna, the strikes, the hatred, the political animosity, had been built on a foundation of lies. What had happened to break that friendship? And why had Astrid kept these photos? Elias returned to the station. The autopsy report had arrived, and the results were disturbing. Cause of death: severe skull-base fracture due to blunt force trauma. Death was instantaneous. Time of death: 2 days after her disappearance, not the day she was last seen. Additional note: traces of a mild sedative in her system indicating captivity. Astrid had been kidnapped or held, and she was killed 2 days after her disappearance. Someone had been hiding her all that time. Elias knew he had to confront the man who had lied the most, Lars Larsen, not because of the murder symbol, but because of the lie about his friendship with Olsen. He found Lars Larsen in a small grey workshop outside the city, repairing a snowmobile. The air smelled of oil and metal. Elias placed the photos of the young, laughing friends on the workbench. "I spoke with Sven Olsen. He described you as a fanatic and his arch-enemy. He said you have hated each other for 20 years, that you tried to destroy him during the strikes. But here you stand, 1998, arm in arm. What happened to your enmity, Lars? Lars lifted his head. His eyes were weary. He understood that Elias had broken through the facade. The mind destroys friendships, Inspector. Always has. Lars finally broke the code of silence, his voice broken. He recounted how he and Olsen, as young men, had an accident in the mine, killing a colleague. Olsen had lied to management and abandoned Lars to save his career. Lars became the scapegoat and the leader of the alliance. Olsen is the traitor, Lars said with sharp bitterness. He betrayed all of us, the miners, the town. He could have done it. He is powerful. He is evil. Astrid knew about these photos, or she found them. She knew you were lying, and Olsen was lying. The killer knew that the symbols of betrayal and the old hatred between you and Olsen would focus attention on the wrong place. Elias confronted him with the crucial question. Did you move the body, Lars? Lars was silent for a long time. The air in the workshop seemed to solidify. Yes, Lars confessed. When Astrid disappeared, I was furious with Olsen. I searched for evidence, anything to destroy him with. 2 days after her disappearance, I received an anonymous tip, a location on the Torneträsk Lake. I went there. The body was already there, frozen in the snow, not in the water. I placed her. I let her down into the water and let her freeze. I knew the police would then look at Olsen. The symbol on her wrist was the clue to the traitor. It was meant to show the world what Olsen had done. Elias looked at the desperate man. You were set up, Lars, and your manipulation gave the perpetrator a 2-day head start. And why did you know the exact location on the lake, Lars? Lars slammed his fists on the workbench. That spot is where my son, Björn, always goes ice fishing. A deep spot, easy to find. He had shown me that spot. Björn, the silent local partner, he knew the location. He had the opportunity, and he had lied about his father's enmity. Elias immediately got into his car and called the chief. He requested Björn Larsson be immediately removed from the case, but Björn didn't answer. Elias drove to the police station. It was late. Most desks were empty. He found Björn in the small, dim archive room, burning papers in a metal wastebasket. The air was thick with smoke. Björn, Elias said, his voice low and dangerous. Björn turned around. There was no surprise in his eyes, only acceptance. You found my father, Björn said, and he told you everything. About Olsen, about the lie, and about the spot on the ice. Elias walked slowly to the wastebasket. The documents were already charred. You killed her, Björn. Not the mine. Not your father. You. Chapter 4. The Arrest. Elias stood in the small, dim archive room. The smoke from burning paper stung his eyes, but Björn Larsson's gaze stung harder. The young, local officer stood motionless by the metal wastebasket. You killed her, Björn. Not the mine. Not your father. You. Elias's voice was a flat statement of fact, without anger, which only increased the threat. Björn nodded slowly. He was no longer the tense, reckless officer. He was tired, defeated. She had to stop, Björn whispered, his gaze fixed on the charred paper. She had found too much. Elias now had the pieces together. Freya called you the Watcher, not because you protected her, but because you were supplying her with information. You were the secret older boyfriend. Björn sat down on a stool, his head in his hands. I wanted out of here, I wanted to move up. I wanted away from my father's hellish mind shadow. When Astrid started her research, I saw an opportunity. Elias laid out the scenario piece by piece. Astrid was your alibi to delve deep into the mine's administration. You gave her information about the old, illegal dumping grounds that were still leaking toxic material under the false flag of her journalistic research. In return, you gained access to the logbooks and Sven Olsen's internal reports, your father's enemy. You used Astrid's rebellion to position yourself for a promotion. You would be the hero who exposed Olsen's corruption through your father, the old alliance. Björn looked up. The pain in his eyes was genuine. I loved her, Elias. I did it for us, to have a future outside Kiruna. But Astrid found out you were using her, that you weren't exposing the information out of idealism, but out of pure cold ambition. She discovered you weren't planning to expose Olsen immediately, but were waiting for the perfect moment to launch your career. Björn's voice broke. She threatened to reveal everything, that I was the source, that I was lying about my father's role in the past, and that I was manipulating the data to frame Olsen. If she had done that, I would have lost everything. My job, my honor, my future. The autopsy indicated 2 days between disappearance and death. Elias continued. You held her in the only place no one would look, the old barn by the railway she used for her secret meetings with the Watcher. You sedated her and tried to talk her out of it. She wouldn't yield, Björn whispered. She laughed at me. She said I was just as much a traitor as Olsen. You hit her, an impulsive act, a cold calculation of the moment, and then she was dead. Elias's eyes fixed on Björn. You called your father anonymously with the location, knowing he would recognize the betrayal rune and move the body to a spot that pointed toward Olsen. You used your father's hatred to cover your own crime. The documents Björn was trying to burn were not the mine reports, but the logbooks of his own patrol car and his personal notes about the meetings with Astrid, which could link his trail to her disappearance. Elias pulled out the handcuffs. The cold metallic click was the only sound that pierced the silence of the archive room. Astrid Nilsson wasn't killed by the corruption of the mine, Björn. She was killed by the fear of a small man who wanted to protect his dream of power. Björn stood up and allowed himself to be willingly handcuffed. He looked at Elias, not with hatred, but with a hollow emptiness. Kiruna freezes everything to death, Inspector. Friendship, love, hope. You think you found the truth, but in this town, there is no truth, only survival. Elias led Björn out of the archive room, the shadows of the dark corridors absorbing the last vestiges of the young officer. We came here looking for a conspiracy, for dark mine lords, for bribery and revenge. But the betrayal symbol on her wrist pointed to a much smaller, much crueler truth. It pointed to the man who sat beside me every day, who had loved her, or at least desired her, and who subsequently used her as a stepping stone to his ambition. The cold of Kiruna preserved her body, but it was the freeze in his heart that killed her. Fear. Fear of losing what he thought he deserved. And in a town this dark and isolated, fear freezes harder than